Welcome to this edition of the Yahowah blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. Two of the most challenging topics within the Torah are found in Numbers. As a matter of fact, most of the most difficult passages in the Torah are in Numbers. The two that we're going to be addressing today, actually one, but it leads to the second, is called the Adulterous Woman, and that is a story that is told in Numbers 5. It actually is resolved in Numbers 19 with the Adamah Parah, although most people don't recognize the connections between them. Now, of course, that material in between these statements is also exceedingly difficult to process, particularly if you're a Israelite. In fact, anyone that is pursuing a relationship with Yahowah. And the reason for this is that God clearly is angry with his people, exceedingly disappointed. And to the extent that he abandons Israel. It's not that he turns to anyone else, well, he will, but after a very long time, 3,400 years to be precise. But he just says that Israel's impossible. They're whorish. They don't listen. They've got a really, really crappy attitude, and that they're miserable to be around. So God announced his divorce of Israel through the prophet Hosea, writing his letter of divorce by conveying it through this prophet who he had asked to marry a religious whore so that he could speak with empathy about what God is enduring. And the reason this is just so difficult for most people to process is that it has long been incorrectly assumed that religions are something that God appreciates, that religions draw people closer to God, that religions are good and positive things, when the opposite is true. Religion is the bane of human existence. It is nothing but a control mechanism to influence and plunder people. You know, the worst of them would be Islam, where in its first 100 years, they bludgeoned a third of the earth's population to death, enslaving and plundering countless more. 200 million people were killed in the first 100 years of Islam. Christianity wasn't nearly as murderous, not in the physical sense, although it has taken more souls than has Islam. And it was no less deplorable as it relates to demeaning and dehumanizing Jews. Christianity literally blames Jews for killing their pretense of a God, as if even that were possible. But nonetheless, that is the basis of anti-Semitism today. And so with most people believing wrongly that religion is good and that religion leads to God, God has exactly the opposite view. And he calls his people whores, not because of their sexuality. He's got no issue with their sexuality. It's their religiosity, is why he calls them unfaithful, prostitutes, whores. And this is the nature of this story of the adulterous woman. It does not represent a female any more than a male. It's all of Israel. And since Yahowah divorced Israel by the teaching in his Torah, he's not in a position that he can even symbolically remarry Israel. So he has to have an arranged marriage, if you will. And the marriage that he has arranged is to wed Israel, his people, to his beloved son, Dod, who is the returning king. And this wedding will take place on Kippurim in year 6,000 Yah, October 2nd as the sun sets in Jerusalem in 2033. So now that you know that the adulterous woman is this mortal remnant of Israel that will be brought back to Jerusalem on Teruah in 2033 for the benefit of King David, who is returning, David, let's hear what Yahowah has to say about this situation. The text of Numbers 5 reads, Yahowah spoke to Moshe. His name means one who draws out. To say, declare this to the children of Israel. Branded with a stigma and a sign of being possessed and controlled by another is a man or a woman who chooses to continually act upon or habitually engage in any part of that which is offensive, that which is wrong, with guilt ensuing as a result, as well as those missing the way and, in particular, leading others astray, misleading by denying and forfeiting the relationship. You can see that we are now where we have the opportunity presenting the translated text that I am sharing with you. A couple of notes on it as we proceed. One is that these translations are my own. I have devoted the last 24 years, essentially every waking hour, anywhere from 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, would be over 100,000 hours, to studying the oldest examples of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. That would be from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Correcting the text to reflect the oldest witnesses, and then scrubbing every word of the diacritical markings of the rabbis so that I look at just the essence of the message conveyed through the letters themselves, while also studying the verbal root of each word so that we know the basis of that word. We have some etymological history to base our understanding. And so these translations not only scrub the text of the religious rubbish of the rabbis and correct the testimony to the oldest extant witness of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is, typically from the 2nd century BCE, while the Masoretic text, the oldest, would be dated to the 12th century CE. So there's 1,300 years, 1,300 years difference. And the Masoretic text was written in Babylon, a long way away, by very religious people, whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls were written in the shadow of Jerusalem, right where all of these things were being said and taking place. So it's a profoundly different approach. And you can also see that my translating style is by amplification. I invented this style. There is an Amplified Bible, but it doesn't provide any amplification. So I don't know why they call it that. And it doesn't use this style at all. It's a copyrighted style that I invented some 24 years ago to present God's testimony in a way never seen before. And the advantage of this amplifications style, which is proprietary, and I don't mind people sharing aspects of it when they are communicating it in context, properly crediting it, and drawing cogent conclusions from it. I don't like it when we have those who would be treacherous and use this style so they could pass off my work as their own. That is exceedingly criminal and duplicitous and deceitful. So in this format, you'll see the key part of the communication that God is offering in a bold format. And then that is followed by the word that we are rendering in an italicized form within a parenthetical. And if that word requires more elucidation, I will do so within the parenthetical, like Asha, for example. It reads, who chooses to continually act upon or habitually engage in. Asha is typically rendered do in most English translations, and they leave it at that. But as I shared previously, I like to render Asha more in a manner that encourages us to engage. One of the great examples is we look at Noah and building the ark per Yahowah's instructions. And the entire reason that Noah was spared, he and his family, of course, the animals aboard that ark, and everyone with a Nasama, who was a descendant of Adam and Chawah from the garden around the area of Lake Van and the Black Sea. The reason they all didn't survive by intent was that Noah not only listened to God, which is essential, the word is shama, he listened to what Yahowah said, but he acted. He engaged based upon God's instructions. And so it's very important to communicate that God wants an active relationship. He wants us engaged in this relationship. He wants us to listen to him and then respond. Simply listening, that's a nice start. It's, the religious don't do it. The rabbis don't do it. Practitioners of Judaism don't do it. Christians don't do it. Muslims don't do it. Marxists, of course, don't do it. But listening to God is the first step. But the second is to respond, to act and engage based upon his instructions. So Asha is amplified in this way. They are willing and consistently commit, as the amplified rendition of this. It was written in the called imperfect jussive, third person plural. And sometimes it's helpful to know these kinds of things. And in this case, the call stem says this is a non-nuanced meaning. In the relationship between the subject and the object, pursuant to the action of the verb, which is to act, it's just straightforward. The meaning here is straightforward, uncomplicated, genuine, and actual. In the imperfect conjugation, God is looking for habitual behavior. He wants us to consistently respond in this way. The jussive is a third-person expression of volition. This particular verb was written in third person. So it is our choice, but God is encouraging us to make the right one, if you will. In Hebrew, there is an expression of volition in first, second, or third person, which is telling by itself. You have a language which has relational stems that define the interaction between the subject and the object of the verb and the action that it is imparting, which means that God's speaking about a relationship and wants you to perceive what he is saying about that relationship in a way that you understand the connection between the person speaking and the person being spoken of. And the second is that imagine a language so infused with free will that you would have an expression of free will conveyed in first, second, or third person, and sometimes in the same sentence, particularly when Dode is speaking to Yahowah and they're having a father-son conversation. You'll read both expressions of volition in first and second person, so both in the cohortative and the imperative, saying that Dode and Yahowah were on the same page. They agreed, their motivations were in sync with regard to the things that they had decided to accomplish. The other part of this that I think is interesting, we won't do this analysis with every verb, but we'll never get anywhere in this process, but I just want you to know that it's there and you can think about it, is that Hebrew has two conjugations. They're the perfect and the imperfect. And the reason it has these two conjugations is because Hebrew is a very unique language, and where the verbs act as a photon of light. What that means is that there is no conveyance of past, present, or future tense in the Hebrew. When God says something, it is for all time. It is true in the past, it is true in the present, it is true in the future. And this is the nature of light. On a photon of light, time exists. So it would house the past, present, and future simultaneously. It's the very nature of prophecy. Yahowah, as a spiritual energy-based being, can therefore maneuver in time, and he can see our future in our past, which is what he is reporting. So he's really reporting future history. And so the perfect conjugation limits the action. So if this being engage, it would be to engage at a moment in time if it was in the perfect. That moment in time can be past or present or future, but it is an activity that is limited in time, not ongoing. Where in the imperfect, it is ongoing. That would be habitual, continual, consistent behavior. Sometimes it makes a big difference, like in the statements that Yahowah etched in stone, where he said things like, don't bear false witness. It's actually written in the imperfect, so it says don't consistently continue to bear false witness. So if you're bearing false witness about God, for example, because you're religious, you're calling him Hashem or G-D, or you're talking about your Talmud or rabbinical lore and promoting Judaism or Christianity or any other religion, then you're bearing false witness. And you wouldn't be in violation of God's instruction in this regard. But because it's written in the imperfect, the moment you stop, you're no longer guilty of doing that. So having written those instructions in the imperfect means that all we have to do is stop being in conflict with them, and we are no longer guilty of them. It's a very powerful concept in that regard. So the imperfect is ongoing behavior throughout time. So anyways, I just want you to know these kinds of things because a lot of thought went into rendering this as accurately and as completely as possible, and then doing something no one had ever done before. I'm laying all of the cards open, face up on top of the table, so that you now can use your search engine. Because these books are all available just as you see them here. This is a flip book version of what is Qatsyr Harvest. Here's the real McCoy here, 825 pages. We're around page 795-ish of this book as we're covering this particular material. And so you can online, because all the books are free in their entirety, which is, of course, very unique. I don't think there's any other author that has written nearly as much as I have, written many times more than all of the prophets of Yahowah combined, and offers everything for free. But I do. I want you to know what I know. God wants you to know what I know. And, the other aspect of this, now you can take and do a copy and paste, take the word Asha, for example, and paste it into a search engine and or take it to your favorite site where words can be defined. And you'll find that there's probably 8 or 9 free Hebrew English dictionaries online. A lot of support for the text. Check out Asha. Copy and paste it. See if my rendering is accurate. See if, in fact, it means do, make, act, engage, commit, celebrate, benefit from, capitalize on. See if those definitions are all part of it. My hope would be that you wouldn't do what so many have done previously and say, well, I did that and I don't get the same definition that you do, because I'm not basing what I'm sharing with you on one lexicon. And the reason you can't do that is that in particular, Strong's, which is the most popular and the oldest of them, is keyed to the King James. And so it wants to give the first rendering such that it is consistent with what the King James chose, even if that rendering has no validity. And they do it a lot. And the second reason is that there are much better lexicons. And what you find is that truth is found when you compare many, and that you don't just stop at one spelling of the word, but you look at the letters that comprise that word, and you consider all words that are written with that same basis, so that you're getting a full perspective of what the word can mean. I typically will look at anywhere from 8 to 15 different lexicons, unless it's a word that, I've translated, like Asha. I've translated Asha thousands and thousands of times. So, I don't look it up anymore. Coal, which is the next statement, men. Men is from, out of. Coal is all or every, the entirety of something. All means all. That's all means. Chata, the next word that appears here, it's chata and chata'a, are used commonly in God's vocabulary. And so after you've done this for 24 years, you're not looking up every word anymore. But as you begin, I would encourage you to do it, because it'll give you great confidence. And plus, you'll get a familiarity with God's vocabulary. So this is the nature of who chooses, because remember, juicive, to continually act upon or habitually engage. Why? Because it's in the imperfect, and it's defining Asher, any part of min kol, that which is offensive and wrong, ensuing guilt for those missing the way and leading others astray. Chata'a is one of 10, 12 words that Yahowah uses that people like to render as sin, but sin is really a religious term, and I don't like using religious terms. When you study the root of chata and chata'a, you'll see that the root speaks of going astray and leading others away from God. That is the nature of the word, and it conveys the idea of encouraging, or not encouraging, but of being encumbered with guilt as a result of leading others astray. And that's the guilt that needs to be expunged if we're going to have a relationship with God. And when you look at a word like chata'a, which is something where it's a collective problem, and he's speaking now to all Israel. So this is not an individual that decides to leave somebody on the wrong path and walk through the wilderness of the forest. No, this is a collective issue. And when the problem is leading people astray, and the subject is God, and the object is Israel, there's only one institution that does that kind of thing: religion. And so chata'a is ensuing religious guilt for leading many people astray and away from God. By acting in an adulterous and unfaithful manner, being defiant and treacherous, by rising above Yahowah. Okay, we're in a chapter that is known as the adulterous woman. We're finding that God is speaking to all Israel. He has specifically said men and women. In that prior sentence, the same verse here, it's Ish, O, Isha. Ish is male, man, individual from a masculine perspective. And Isha means one of two things in Hebrew. It is the word for fire, but with from a feminine fire. Doesn't mean the fire is girly. It's just that Hebrew, like so many languages, has a male and female form that is useful, because then you can look at the pronouns and make certain that you understand what's being discussed. It's really a very handy tool in the language. But Isha either means fire or woman. And so God is speaking of men and women, and the reason that it is assumed we're talking about a woman is because there's a groom in this story. And that groom is not named, but it is easily deduced from the rest of the Torah that that groom is Dod, God's beloved son. So by acting in an adulterous and unfaithful manner. So right after Teruah, which is addressing religion, leading the preponderance of God's people astray and therefore away from him, we have Ma'al, which is defined as acting in an adulterous and unfaithful manner by being defiant and treacherous, and therefore rising above Yahowah. I'm translating now finished Numbers 11, 12, 13, and 14, and I'm about a third of the way through Numbers 15. This is one of the most embarrassing experiences to even tread upon. It's almost beyond words as to how bad the children of Israelites have been towards God and continue to be. Literally telling God to go away and shut up. We never want to see you or hear from you again. And they were so belligerent against the gift of Israel, the promised land. They besmirched Yahweh's reputation. They just trashed it. Lucky, I mean, it's just amazing that God went through with the offer after their review. And he only then went on with two men, Caleb and Asha ben Nun, and those who were under 20. And one of the things we find is on this being belligerent and unfaithful and rising above Ma'al, Yahowah, is that when Yahowah said, you're not going into the land. You told me you didn't like it, you didn't want it, you thought you're all going to die. You're not going in. That's just bottom line. You're not going to go in. I'm not leading you in. I'm not offering it to you anymore. You're not going there. Well, they got all full of themselves and said, well, in fact, they even used Teruah in their context, and they ran off into the hill country, and the first thing they said is, look at us. And the next thing you'll find is they're all dead. So this is exactly what God's talking about here. He's just telling them in advance what they're going to do. And it's what they did. By acting in an adulterous and unfaithful manner, and they'd already done it, by the way. They had already made the golden calf, which is actually a bull, part of the Apis, the bull cult of the pharaohs. So they had already been religious. They didn't learn their lesson. And that is what the adulterous woman is a condemnation of the religiosity of Israel. God hates religion, all forms of it. And the only way to be in God's presence is not only to renounce religion, but then be purged of it. And that is the story that we're hearing here, where the remnant of Israel is purged of religion prior to Yahweh's return with his beloved son, David. So by acting in an adulterous and unfaithful, unreliable manner, cheating on God with religion, by being defiant and treacherous, by rising above, trespassing, going where you shouldn't go, by pretending to ascend and be superior to. Now, God likes people with confidence. You look at Moshe had a lot of confidence. Sometimes he didn't show it. Dod had tremendous confidence. Sometimes he didn't show it. But for the most part, these are pretty confident guys. You look at any one of his prophets. To be a prophet of Yahweh, you've got to have some confidence because everybody is against you. And so just to stick to the story, you really have to have tremendous confidence. But when confidence is no longer based in your trust of Yahweh, but becomes conceit, then you're in serious trouble with God. He doesn't handle conceit well at all. Confidence he loves, conceit he despises. So he says that soul of this descendant of Adam, and Adam is the first man created in God's image, where he was given something very special, a nesama, which is a conscience in addition to consciousness, will be deemed guilty and will suffer the consequence. Being unfaithful with God and cheating by being religious, therefore breaking the covenant relationship. See, the covenant's first condition is for you to walk away from Babel, from all forms of religion and politics. And so if you return to religion or politics, then you're cheating on God. You're unfaithful. You're an adulterous and treacherous whore. Don't like it? Take it up with God. I happen to like it. I don't have any problem with it. In fact, I'm supportive of his decision. I agree with him. And that's because I have studied religions. I've written 13 books on the Abrahamic religions, 5 on Islam, exposing and condemning Allah and Muhammad, the Quran itself. No one has done a more comprehensive job of proving that Allah was not a god, that Muhammad was not a prophet, and that Islam is not a holy book, but a piece of absolute rubbish. And I've done the same thing with Christian New Testament and the 5 volumes of Twistianities. Goddamn religion for Islam, Twistianity for Christianity. And I have proven that Paul was not a prophet. He was not an apostle. He did not speak for God. The Gospels were written much later. They reflect Paul's sentiment, Paul that created the myth of Jesus. Jesus never existed. He's not only not a god, he never existed. He's a crude counterfeit of David, who's the actual Messiah and Son of God, who was crucified in 33 CE in his second of 3 lives. I have disproven the entirety of the Christian New Testament and the authenticity of every character in it, including Jesus. So I know a lot about this. And then in the 3 books that I wrote that were about a comprehensive analysis of the books scribed in Babylon, Daniel and Ezekiel, I completely discredit Judaism. So I know a fair amount about religion, and I understand why God hates religion. And I don't think there's anybody that's ever done a more comprehensive job, particularly in disproving the religions that are the most obnoxious from God's point of view. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So he's saying that by being religious and pretending to be more important than Yahowah, like valuing the Talmud and citing the Talmud over the Torah, for example, or the New Testament over the prophets, for example, Yahowah is saying that the soul of this descendant of Adam will be deemed guilty, and you're going to suffer the consequences of this. Now, that is not a death sentence. Yeah, it is unless you benefit from the cure. Yahowah has established a cure, and he's going to speak of one element of that cure here in Numbers 5. When you get to Numbers 15, he lays it all out. He gives the story of the bull, the lamb, and the goat, and what each of them do to contribute to our salvation. These are 3 of the most important characters in God's story. The bull is Yada. You're listening to him. The greatest person by far, God's chosen one, the Messiah, the former and returning king, our Savior, is David. He is the lamb. He fulfilled Passover. And Eliah, known as Elijah, the extraordinary man who was unafraid to challenge and condemn Israel for being religious and political. And he is returning, and he is the goat in this story. So God has a solution, but you got to know the story to know that solution. And that starts with, well, accepting Yahowah by name, coming to know who the players are in the story and the roles they endure, really, to bring this news to you. It's a damn tough job that each of the 3 of us, and if I put Moshe into the mix, happy to have him in that mix. Moshe gave up on you. He asked Yahowah to kill him. He was just so distraught with the realization that no one can effectively lead Israel. They are that belligerent. I've had people, when I tell that story, condemn me and say, how dare you say that about Jews? That is, a blood libel. I said, well, take it up with Yahowah. I'm telling you what the Torah says. Let's deal with what the Torah says. We can't play pretend anymore. And then they'll come back, well, that was those people long ago, doesn't pertain to us. And my response will be, actually, the stories that we're reading, like this one, had no value whatsoever for the people long ago. None. They didn't listen to God. They didn't do as he requested. They were belligerent to him. They even told him, go away, shut up. We don't want to hear from you again. We don't want to be around you anymore. These stories in the Torah had no value whatsoever to Israel, not then and not even now. None. It wasn't until we began this cooperation between Yahowah, when he asked me to do this for him, that these stories are now being presented not as history, although they were lived out through the lives of the children of Israel, but prophecy. Every one of these stories and numbers throughout pertains to us right now. These stories are literally coming alive in your hearing, being understood by their intent at this very moment, because we're only a year or so from entering the time of Israel's troubles. 2 out of every 3 Jews are going to die. The world is going to be destroyed. The Antichrist is already here. He is maneuvering and demon-possessed already. And I've identified who he is. He's going to betray Israel. It's going to be exceedingly dark. And then it ends. There's one exceedingly important redeeming day, Shabuah, as a harvest between now and then. And then in the end, there are 3 extraordinary days: the Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah. And that is when the solution is all lined up. The story of the bull, the lamb, and the goat, of Numbers 15. So Yahowah is speaking through Moshe to us today because the children of Israel made the single worst decision in human history. A few years back, in his presence, and after he had freed them from being enslaved under the conditions which had become tantamount to genocide, they told God to go away, and they never wanted to see him again or to hear from him again. And this is why Yahowah spoke indirectly through his prophet, beginning with Moshe and continuing that way all the way to the present day, although there was a 2,500-year gap in between. It is why the lives of his people were and continue to be so miserable, unfulfilling, threatened. It's why, in Rabbinic Judaism, what are they wearing? Mourning suits for their own funeral. It was this attitude which, actually led to their enslavement. This is why they were wandering around in the wilderness. It is why they have been invaded and persecuted more than any other people. It's why the entire world has risen up in a tidal wave of anti-Semitism. And of course, if you even look at the basis of anti-Semitism, it's from Shem, the Hebrew word for name. Hebrews use it all the time. They call their God Hashem, the name. And it's actually a condemnation of Yahowah's name, where it is just denied by Christians, by Jews, by Muslims, by Marxists, by everyone. And so the real revolt is against all things associated with Yahowah. And the truth is that Israelites became so bad, they strayed so far from Yahowah, that they actually erased his name and then forgot his name. And so he did not intervene on their behalf, and he allowed 10 of the 12 tribes to be hauled into oblivion by way of the Assyrians. And then even with the best of the 12, Yahudah, after a while, there were none who were willing to listen and then communicate on Yahweh's behalf. And that is why he asked and then equipped his Nakar, his observant foreigner, as the man from Edom, Jacob's twin brother, to serve as his coal voice to awaken Yisrael before everyone misses the Shabuah, Teruah, harvest, and the ultimate expression of redemption of the mortal remnant, the sacrifice of the Adam of Parah, all leading to the Kippurim homecoming with doubt. Now, being wrong and missing the way, especially leading others astray, has become a Yisraelite tradition, a brand that they have seared upon themselves. And from God's perspective, it is both it's adulterous, it's offensive, and it has been a sign of defiance, a revolt, because so many have claimed to speak for the God that they silence, talking over him and the New Testament. And my friend, we don't need the text up unless we're actually sharing something from a translation. I think it'd be more appropriate that way. Thank you. If you want to read along and see the inspiration for much of what I'm saying here, because it's so much that is ad-libbed and so much of it is contemporaneous, as much as impromptu, that I'd much rather us show the text when we're actually discussing a statement that is derived from Yahweh, that he inspired. But the commentary on all of this, it's so much of it is expressive in the moment that it's better not cluttering the screen. Yahweh, 8 months ago, came to me and said, I want you to take a different approach. You've spent the last, at that point, had been 23 years writing, composing these 30 some odd books behind me, offering them free at yada.com. And God's suggestion was that, obviously you're going to continue to translate and write. That's what you love. But another book isn't going to be all that incremental in making a difference with my people. It's time you talk to them. I want you to talk to them. And the way I want you to talk to them is I really want you to have a camera and to speak directly to them, to look my people in the eye, because there is something about the spoken word that is more powerful than the written word. The inflections, the emotion, the sincerity of it. And there was a time where I was convinced that we should stick strictly to the written word. And the advantage of the written word is that with it, here, for example, with it, there's a permanent record of it. You can proceed through it at your time and at your pace. And it's always there for you to verify. Put it in writing, and you can go check on it, and I'm held accountable to it. I just thought that's why Yahweh conveyed everything that he communicated through his prophets to us in writing, so that it could be retained accurately over a period of time. Well, technology has advanced, and God actually speaks of it. And when Solomon gave his speech at the commencement address on Mount Moriah for the first home for Yahweh's name, the temple, and he speaks of a voice coming out of the sky, literally speaking to everybody around the world, wherever they might live. And now with this distribution medium, that everybody has 8 billion smartphones in the world today. And very soon, those smartphones will all go directly to a satellite, won't even need an internet provider. And you can listen to everything that I'm saying. The world has essentially stopped reading. It's why you look at a place like X, and it's all little short videos and people becoming fixated on these little videos. It might have a 5-word caption. If you get much past 5 words, people stop reading. And so books that are, 825 pages and you've got over 30 of them, that's just not how people want to interact today. There are some, and I'm glad I've written them because, well, I was the greatest beneficiary of them. And without that foundation, I can't be talking to you. But now the spoken word is retained every bit as firmly, as permanently, really, as the written word, because the moment you do what I'm doing now, you live stream one of these programs, it's broadcast as probably now on 15 different channels and accounts, between the big players, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, X, we're on TikTok and Rumble and Odyssey, and it just goes on and on with all of these places. There's a permanent record of what we're saying, and people now can listen to it at their convenience anywhere, and they can pick up a phone, and even if they don't have great eyes, as we get older, you press play, and all of this comes right at you and formatted for your telephone. That's the way people want to learn. And so God's message was, go that way. I want you to talk to my people. And that is what we're doing. And we're presenting the information that I've learned. I will share the text that I have written because I've thought about it before putting it down. And there's a lot of insights there. And then we'll expound upon them and update it for what we have learned subsequently. This is a learning experience, which is why it took so much time to go through the nuances of the text and that last passage that we cited. It is a learning experience. And it's important because I want you to recognize that while my message is wholly inconsistent with that of religion and that of politics, because God is anti-religion and anti-political, it isn't my message. It's God's. And God does not like the idea of people talking over him through their Talmuds and their New Testaments. He wants you to know that the Talmud is not from him and he despises it. He wants you to know that the New Testament is not from him and he hates it with a passion. God wants you to know that the Quran is satanic rubbish. Well, the consequence of promoting these things, of course, is guilt. And it is this rotten residue that must be expunged even after we have stopped adding to it. And for those who want to be included during the Shabua Qatsyr and the Teruah Lakat, their souls will have to have previously been purged of this guilt. And the only way that happens is by celebrating matzah with Dode, where Dode soul carried our guilt and deposited in Sheol, never to be seen again. However, for the remnant left behind during the final gleaning, having missed the Teruah harvest, they now, with no intervention from Chag Matzah, have to come up with a way. They don't have to. God came up with a way to remove this religious and political fungus from them prior to his return so that they can be purged and wed to his returning king and enter the millennial Shabbat. And so this is the purpose of the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. Adamah means red, and it is of man, and bloody, therefore. And Parah is a productive bull. Par means bull, Parah means productive. So this is a bloody, red, and productive bull, Adamah Parah. It is reassuring to see these explanations of what is often called adultery presented before commencing this prophecy regarding the adulterous woman, because what you have seen is there is no reference here to sexuality at all. God has no issue if a man or a woman has multiple sexual partners. He does not care if you have sex outside of marriage. He doesn't even use the word marriage. Relationship with him that revolves around family would be his Bereth covenant. There are no marriage vows in the Torah or the prophets, none. Divorce in the Torah is as simple as writing a letter, which is what Yahweh did through the prophet Hosea. There are no wedding rings. There are no vows. None of this exists in the Torah. This is all a Christian or Jewish religious adaptation, corruption of God's testimony. And so you look at God's favorite people, they don't become any closer or more chosen or anointed, empowered, enlightened than David. And he had 8 wives and 10 concubines. So God is not the least bit concerned about multiple sexual partners. That is not what is meant by adultery. And it should have been obvious, but people like to control others, I guess. The word is used in the Hebrew to describe cheating on God with other false gods. It is religious infidelity, and it is leading people astray by way of religion. In this case, it would be Judaism. And since rabbis created it, Christianity, and well, since rabbis created it, Islam. So from Yahweh's perspective, those who are religious and who are political are branded. They wear a stigma. They're identified as being part of those foul institutions, and they've ensued the guilt for having cheated on him. And God does not bring people to heaven, nor does he save those who have cheated on him until they stop cheating on him and eschew religion. They say, no more, I'm done with it, I hate it, I despise it, I will openly disavow it. And you go from first disavowing religion and all connections to religion to embracing the terms of the covenant, benefiting from the invitations to be called out and meet these Mow'ed Miqra'ey, and accepting Yahweh by name and his son by what he has achieved on our behalf. That this then stench of this religiosity and this branding are purged. So it is as if the children of Israel were wearing a sign scratched with their own blood on their foreheads. I belong to the Haredi, or to the Likud. And for these things, there is a consequence, life and death, both of which entail separation from God. So let's be clear. Since God has been with us, the primary use of adultery in the Torah has nothing to do with sexuality, has nothing to do with marriage. The men and women portrayed in the Torah were not monogamous. I'm not even sure it's natural for men or women to be monogamous. I've certainly experienced the joy of it here with Leah on this beautiful idyllic island, and I would highly recommend it. Particularly when you really have a intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and physical connection. But it is just not the way that the people in God's story lived. So they were never criticized. Never once was anyone criticized for having more than one lover or for who they chose to love, not from God. In fact, when somebody tried to criticize someone's woman, in the case of Miriam, challenging her brother, Moshe, there isn't even a word for wife, by the way, or husband. It's just the right word for man and woman. So it's very different mentality from God's point of view. Sexuality is only seen as repulsive and inappropriate if it involves any nuance of incest, because of the damage that does to people. Rape, pedophilia, bestiality are all things God says just don't do that. There really isn't a prohibition against homosexuality among consenting adults. The word that God uses actually speaks of something that was very prevalent in the day, that when armies were victorious over their foe, and you have men that are close combat, they've been killing one another with daggers and with swords. It's a very brutal kind of thing, and they're all out there for years on their own, just around a bunch of other men, and they had this propensity for the victor to rape the conquered, and God says that is really revolting. Don't do that. So that's what he is even speaking about in this regard. And I will go into this quite often when teaching about God's mentality, because the religious have really screwed it up. They look at Islam. They want the woman to be covered in a tent as if she is she's trash and she's covered in a bag, and she has no rights. And Yahowah just detests that. You look at Judaism, the first thing a woman must do, she's going to be married, she needs to shave her hair. And what a terrible thing to do, because hair can be the crowning glory of a woman's beauty. But it's just a disgusting thing. If a woman wants a divorce, she can't get one without her husband writing an authorization for it. And God never says anything like that. It's a horrible practice. In Christianity, Paul writes that men lord over their wives. Again, a miserable, horrible, demeaning kind of thing. So God doesn't like the religious view of these things. As I said, he does not have any marriage vows, doesn't even have a term for marriage, does not even have a term for husband and wife. And if you're unhappy in a relationship, he just says, fine, write a letter, explain why you're unhappy, and go on your way. So, very different attitude. Even in the homosexuality issue, God's favorite person by a huge amount was Dode. And the text sure seems to say that he loved Jonathan. They were certainly, and I think it's maybe just the time, but they hugged and kissed and that sort of thing. And I don't know if they went any further than that. And it's, of course, a different era, different time, different social mores and the like. But they were exceedingly close. They loved one another. Clearly, passionately loved one another. And God never once criticizes that relationship. And it's actually shown as an example of something that is exceedingly positive. So, again, the moment you project religiosity on God, you've done yourself and him a tremendous disservice. And that's one of the reasons God hates religion, because he is cast in an unfavorable light. And so what Yahowah has expressed here and in context provided throughout his Torah and prophets makes it obvious that Yahowah's concern is his people cheating everyone out of the loving relationship with him that he intended through the covenant by being religious instead. So that said, since we have all grown up in religious and political households. I certainly did. Yahowah isn't holding what we may have done previously against us. It is only when someone continues to act or engage in that which leads them and others astray from him that it becomes a problem. If you're never willing to renounce religion, then you don't ever have an opportunity to approach God. If you've just been victimized by religion because you believed what you were told, then at the end of your life, your soul will dissipate into nothing. If you're like a rabbi and you're leading people astray, you have a confirmed reservation in Sheol. So that's the nature of it. If you have walked away from religion, nice first step, but you then have to take the next step, which is to approach God on the terms that he has laid out. So God sees both religion and politics as being defiant and treacherous, egotistical, rising up above God, leading others astray, but also he is opposed to them for exerting their propositions above his instructions, such that it is what you find is the essence of the Talmud. Now, as a result, it is the guilt incurred prior to changing attitudes towards Yahowah, his son, and the covenant that must be expunged. Yahowah has done his part, but soon the final Teruah must do his. Reconciliation must precede Yahowah's return, and for this, Yahowah has a plan. And he had a plan for this really going all the way back to the fourth day of creation, which is the first time that we're exposed to it, of the greater and lesser luminaries serving as signs for these Mow'ed, these restoring witnesses to the eternal meetings that Yahowah has established. Pesach Matzah B'Kudim in the spring, Shabuah in the midst of the year, and then concluding the year in the 7th month with Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah. So for the past 24 years, I have filled the pages of Yada Yahowah with this message. And we must come to appreciate what is right and wrong, good and bad, and take the initiative to acknowledge where we have erred. And even then, we must cast what was wrong aside. And even in our approach to God, you have to realize that we've all come out of this religious and political milieu. There isn't anyone whose life wasn't affected by some form of conspiracy, politics, or religious jargon. All of us have been raised in this very polluted world. And so it's one thing to say, I don't want to be a Christian anymore. I don't want to be part of the Haredi sect anymore. I don't want to be a Marxist anymore. I don't want to be a MAGA anymore. That's a good start. But then you have to begin to wipe your memory cells of all of the preconceived notions. For example, even people who are of a different religion or no religion at all believe that there was a Jesus fellow. It never existed. So for us to proceed in our relationship with God, we need to appreciate that Jesus was nothing but a counterfeit. This is something which must be purged from us to go forward in that relationship. So we need to know what is true and what is not, and take the initiative to acknowledge where we have erred. And this is a process that all of us must engage in over time. I've, in the course of these 23 years, I've learned a lot. And over that time, you end up editing what you previously wrote or said because you've discovered something that is much more consistent with Yahowah's overall plan and much more important for people to know. For example, this transition that we engaged in several years ago of not just recognizing that David is the actual Messiah and Son of God and former and returning king, and that he would lead, absolutely have two lives, just like Elias would have two lives, we learned that it goes much beyond that Dowd wrote of his own crucifixion, that Dowd specifically said when he would fulfill Chag Matzah in 33 CE, that Dowd volunteered for this mission of being our Savior, which means that Dowd not only has 2 lives, but 3 lives, and that he is our Savior, and that he is the one that was counterfeited to create the illusion of Jesus Christ. So that takes us to an entirely different level in our understanding of who God is and what he is offering, and would require us to go back and to make corrections on anything that had been said previously. Part of the growth, part of the excitement of being raised as God's kid and learning from dad. So it is the process of restoration, it's the process of elucidation, it is the means to enlightenment, it is how we become Sadak, right with God. Now, recognizing that we have been led astray by religious affiliations and by political parties, it is simply the first step in the right direction. Disassociating from both is the second. And in this case, Yahowah's instruction has been presented in the Hitpael stem. Now, that sounds like a mouthful, but and I don't want to get too technical, but what that means is that this admission and resolve to disassociate from religion and from politics must be of our own volition. You can still speak of false gods and of religion and of politics, but it is only to expose and to criticize them or to correct myths that are wrong and that are important, particularly as they relate to God's people. And so in the Hitpael stem, it means that we are acting on our own. It means that there is no barrier now. There's no compulsion in doing this. We are jettisoning the religious rubbish because we have chosen to do so and are no longer influenced by or controlled by religiosity or politics. So now we're going back into a statement that is one from Yahowah. So I can already see, boy, you are on your game there, Rich. Thank you for bringing that up. It's nice to have a producer that is not only exceedingly bright and technically astute, but who knows and loves Yahowah and is expert on all of the things that we have discussed. For example, the first thing we did this morning is after breakfast, we had a lovely conversation about the revelations in Numbers 15. First time those passages have ever been properly understood and applied. And it's fun to have those kinds of meetings and to share this kind of stuff. And so Rich is an amazing contributor to this outreach on behalf of God's people. So this reads, on their own initiative, unaffected by others. This is the advantage now of the Hitpael stem. They should understand, acknowledge, and then cast aside. This is wa yada. This means independently and on their own accord. At that time, they should recognize, admit, then throw away. This was written in the Hitpael Perfect. So as the Hitpael, this means this is your own volition to do this. This means that you are shedding the influence, the societal influence of going along with religion. You know, today, the majority of people that celebrate Christmas and Halloween are not Christians, even though they're both religious holidays. They'll even celebrate Easter, and it's clearly not it's a religious holiday. And so it's a matter of breaking all of that and no longer being controlled or influenced by any of it. So on their own volition, unaffected by others, they should understand, acknowledge, and then cast aside independently and of their own accord. At that time, they should recognize and admit their guilt from having been wrong and misleading. This is not a confession. This is just to acknowledge, oh, wow, I was wrong about that. Now that I know that God does not want me to be religious, and I know that Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Marxism have said things that are grossly untrue and have misled me, I'm admitting that I was wrong to believe what they say, and I'm rejecting it. It's the conversation you're having with yourself. So they acknowledge having been wrong and for misleading. This is that Qatsyr word again. And that they had engaged up to this point in time. So this is Asha. So the full sentence would be on their own initiative, therefore unaffected by others. They should understand, acknowledge, and then cast aside, be done with their guilt from having been wrong and for having misled that they had engaged in up to this point in time. Then he will return to transform and restore, with the first and foremost making a reconciling guilt offering for him, then adding something over and beyond the fifth to it. And so for the benefit of the relationship, he will offer this as a gift at the right point in time to the one who was guilty and liable for the wrongdoing. So God is saying there's going to be a guy that is going to come that's going to offer this tremendous gift of removing your guilt. And so the gift is to the person who was previously religious and political. And so God's got a guy that will resolve that on behalf of those who have, prior to receiving that gift, have disavowed their religion and politics. Disavow religion and politics, acknowledge that you were wrong and that you bear the guilt of those things, and then accept what this individual is doing. And it says he will return to transform and restore. Washub. Shub is a exceedingly important term in anything Yahowah has to say. In fact, Yahowah's most repeated prophetic line pursuant to our time is a shub for shub or no shub for you. What he's saying is you need to return to him for him to return to you. And if you're unwilling to return to him, he will not return to you. So shub is the operative thing. When Yahowah wrote the letter of divorce through Hosea, he was emphatic. He says, I'm going away. I'm leaving you. And I will not return to you until you return to me. Shub. So this individual is returning to transform and restore. He is going to come back to turn life around, repairing the damage while encouraging change. Written in the Hitpael Perfect. Hitpael has the object fulfilling this in a manner that would be consistent with as the hand and influence of the person who is speaking this. So the person who is speaking this is Yahowah. Therefore, in the Hitpael stem, the person who is returning is a secondary subject to Yahowah. He is an extension of Yahowah. Now, he's not Yahowah. He's a person who is acting in such a way that his actions convey Yahowah's intent relative to the action of this verb, which is to restore. So as Yahowah wants to restore us, this person in the Hitpael and the Perfect at that moment in time is going to be an extension of Yahowah for the purpose of restoration. God speaks of this a lot. Then adding something over and beyond the fifth to it with his first and foremost reconciling gift that is being offered for him. That's a lot to unpack. And in this regard, there are only 3 people that meet this criterion. Only 3. All 3 are returning. So it's at least a second or a third life. And in most cases, it's their second. They're all returning. 3 individuals, God says they're going to return and that they're going to serve as a reconciling offering, a gift to eliminate the guilt of those who have disassociated from religion and politics and who accept what they're offering. 3 men. The most important, far and away of them, is the Lamb, Dode David, God's chosen one, his Bakor, firstborn son, the Messiah, our King. He did this by fulfilling Passover in 33 CE, year 4000 Yah. Now, this is not speaking of him. Well, it would have normally applied to him. Unfortunately, and universally, Jews rejected what he did. There was no one reconciled at the moment by Dode. Not that we know of anyway. And if we don't know of them, well, it still could be someone there. It doesn't fulfill the prophecy. You have to know of them to fulfill the prophecy. This is a prophecy. This person is going to return. They're going to restore Israel by purging them of their guilt. So it can't be Dode, even though he is our foremost purger, if you will. He took our guilt and deposited it in Sheol, never to be seen again. And he fulfilled Passover, opening the doorway to life and to God's home in heaven. But there were very, very few and none acknowledged who were beneficiaries. The only time that there will be a beneficiary is the upcoming harvest of Shavuot and Teruah. And so the high likelihood is what he's talking about here is the second individual, the bull, who will be offering the sacrifice on Teruah, the day of the herald. And this bull is the Adam of Parah. Yahweh has many terms to describe him. When we move to Numbers 15, we're going to hear each of the terms that Yahweh uses to describe the bull and what is involved in providing total and complete restoration of the relationship by way of the bull. As a matter of fact, what's interesting is in Numbers 15, my Chakma bride over lunch, I said, it's really interesting. I'm reading Yahweh's remedy for the breakdown of the spies, where God says, you are so religious, so whorish, that everybody over the age of 20, with the exception of Kolib and Yosha ben Nun, I am expressly excluding from the promised land, which means from heaven as well. And you all are going to die. Carcasses piled on top of carcasses. And immediately after that, God says, I want to talk to you about the under 20s now, when you enter the promised land. And he says that the means to resolve this destructive, rebellious, embittered relationship against him is going to be a bull, followed by a lamb, and finally there's the quick mention of a goat. And so I was talking about this with Leah, as I'm saying, I've written the translations. I haven't written all the commentary on it, and I'm curious as to why God put the bull in the pole position. The bull's first, then the lamb, and of course the lamb is the most important because the lamb happens to be Dode. followed by the goat, which is working on behalf of the lamb and is appreciated for the work that he's done at the very end. And Leah said, of course, the answer to it is he's not talking about the spring Miqra'ey, but his return on the fall Miqra'ey, and therefore readmission to the promised land, which is being offered to this mortal remnant of Yisrael. And that begins on Teruah, and that's when the bull is sacrificed. So the bull comes first, then the lamb returns. And when the lamb returns, that is when the goat also contributes. So there you have it. And that is likely what God is speaking of here, particularly since he said beyond the fifth. Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim, Shabuah. What's number 5?
Teruah.
Teruah. When is the bull sacrificed on behalf of God's people to reconcile their relationship and remove their guilt?
Teruah.
Teruah. It's the 5th. And so for the benefit of the relationship, he will offer this as a gift. The sacrifice of the lamb, Dode's sacrifice, was Dode's decision. He voluntarily made that and is offering as a gift. He is the son who was given in Isaiah 9. And it'll be true also with the Adamah Parah. The Adamah Parah doesn't have near the importance that Dode has. And so he doesn't get to, as Dode, there's this beautiful progression through the Mizmor, the Psalms, as Dode comes upon the realization that he should do this, that he saw himself in the Torah's testimony being the lamb, fulfilling Passover, and that he recognized this was his calling to do this, something important that he could volunteer to do. And he then is speaking to God and saying, I really want to do this. And you're not going to stop me because this is good for my people. It's good for me. It's good for you. It's good for everybody. It's the right decision. I'm sure it's the right decision. And you read Dode's progression through this. That's why he's the son who is given. With the Adamah Parah, it was simply stated. It was God over the past 24 years, going from, I'm happy you can be anonymous if you want to be. That's just fine with me. You choose the name Yada. That sounds like a pretty good name. It means to know. We're going to come to know a lot of things together. And then there was this realization that he was describing our relationship when describing the Choder, and then describing our relationship when he was describing the Nakar and the Nakri, and it went one after another, and God kept on, as I say, upping the ante. And finally you read with an open mind exactly what God said of the Choder and of the fulfillment of Shabuah and Teruah, and he's blatantly says that is when the Parah, this productive bull, is going to do his thing. And so I was confronted by my role. I was not as smart as Dode, I guess. Thing to volunteer for. I see this sacrifice. I'd like the honor, privilege, if you will, of being able to serve in this way. I wasn't as smart as Dode. I was laid out in front of me, and I said, "Okay, I understand. That is the role I'm being asked to play, and I accept. I will do as requested, and I am honored and privileged to be able to serve, and happy to do so." So it was more, in my case, of an acceptance as opposed to a request. Dode made a request of Yahowah, said, "I want to do this. You want me to do this. So let's do this." In my case, it was, I read that I'm going to be doing this. And I said, okay, well, we're going to be doing this. There's a huge difference between the two, really. I wish I had been smart enough to have seen all of this and to say, there's the sacrifice of the Adam of Parah. It applies to the adulterous woman. There's this sacrifice that clearly it takes place on Teruah. There's this constant mention of the lamb and the bull. So this must be Teruah, and somebody needs to do it. And yeah, I'd like to volunteer. I think that'd be great. To serve your people in this way. Now, yeah, sure, you're going to get bludgeoned and beaten, and your body is going to be torn to ribbons. But okay, that's a few hours, but it's for all eternity. Happy to do it. I wish I'd been smart enough to figure that out. I wasn't, but I'm still delighted with the opportunity. So this is a gift, and it's a gift at that point in time. Nathan, one of the most common verbs in the Hebrew language. Nathan means that it's something that is offered, something that is bestowed. It was written here in the call stem. Remember the call? It means straightforward. He's actually doing this. Perfect. It's going to happen at a moment in time. Third person, masculine, singular. He, one dude, one guy. And he's going to offer this to the one who is guilty. One who is liable for wrongdoing. So there's one who is returning, is doing so on behalf of the guilty. And those guilty, even though they're a massive number of people that return to Israel at this moment by Yah's providence, they make this decision individually. So it is a straightforward process. Come to know and acknowledge that the religion and politics of man are misleading, and that God wants us to disassociate from both, cast these villains aside, recognize that Yahowah has a plan to resolve the guilt incurred prior to accepting the truth about him. I was once very political. I was once very patriotic. I was once exceedingly religious. And I expunged my faith and my beliefs in those things prior to God reaching out to me now 24 years ago, on all days, of course, on a Teruah, right after 9/11. And it was only after walking away from those things that I was approachable, but more usable because I had previously been in them. And this is the lesson of Moshe. Moshe was raised and lived in the political, religious, militant milieu of the caste system being imposed of Miqra'ey, of Egypt. And so he knew those things. He was disgusted by those things. He denounced those things. He stood up against those things and then walked away from them before Yahowah reached out to him. Just like Abraham and Sarah walked away from Babylon, which is the commingling of religion and politics, which is the first condition of the covenant, that we follow that example and do the same thing. So it is essential that we walk away from these things. And since most of us have been influenced by them, that helps us then have empathy with God for what he's trying to achieve. It's why God said to Hosea, marry this religious whore, because if you do, then you're going to have some understanding and empathy of what I'm going through and what I'm trying to achieve through this divorce, and how horrible it is to be married to a religious whore. So God wants us to cast these terrible villains of religion and politics aside before we even attempt to meet with him. Now, almost anyone can be restored and come to Yahowah by acting upon his message, this one that I'm sharing with you. And once restitution is made, our guilt can be resolved. It's resolved through the Mow'ed Miqra'ey, particularly through the combination of Chag Matzah, Pesach Matzah, and Bikurim, and then later through the events of Teruah. And for most, they're going to capitalize upon what Dod has done. Certainly the beneficiaries of the Qatsyr of Shabuah and the Lakat of Teruah, which one before the time of Jacob's troubles, the other one at the end of the bookends for the time of Jacob's troubles. And all of those who capitalize on that will have been the byproduct, the beneficiaries of what Dod has achieved. But the final remnant is actually a bigger deal to God because he wants to return to the land. He wants his people to return. And the only way that can happen as he restores the earth to the conditions of Eden is that this final sacrifice has to be made by one of the characters in God's story, the bull, to purge them of their guilt. So this is what we're talking about here, and unfortunately, not everyone is going to benefit what Dode has done. No matter how much we point, as the lesser luminary, as the moon reflects the sun's light. There's Dode. This is what he's done. Capitalize on it. You'll join us for the Shavuot harvest. Most are not going to listen, and so now there has to be that remedy for the residual final remnant of Yisrael who are brought into Jerusalem to benefit from the sacrifice of the Adam of Parah. This occurs on the Fifth Mow'ed, that being Teruah. So those who were left behind from the two harvests will now need to have their guilt expunged by Yada, serving as the Adam of Parah. It is his sacrifice of what's known as the red heifer that will provide the final opportunity for the final remnant of God's people to come clean and enter the promised land as the earth is returned to the conditions experienced in Eden. Well, I thank you for listening. I've gone well over the normal hour time, but it's been a real pleasure to bring this program to you and to pursue what I think is a living prophecy in the book of Numbers and to explain the story of the adulterous woman in a way that you can apply it to your life. Thank you again for listening to the Yahowah blog. Good day.